Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining in on CCA's Lunch and Learn series that we have today to kick off Face Equality Week, International Face Equality Week. We are so excited to be a part of this movement. And I am 𝐅𝐚𝐜𝐢𝐚𝐥 𝐄𝐪𝐮𝐵, the Executive Director of Children's Craniofacial Association. And I have some wonderful guests here with me. But before we do those introductions, I just want to introduce the concept of what we're doing during this Lunch and Learn. So I'm going to read a little bit about what International Face Equality Week is and why we're doing this. So International Face Equality Week is here. It runs from the 17th to the 24th of May each year, and it is a week devoted to bringing the facial difference community together to further the global face equality movement. So what does face equality mean? To achieve face equality would be to live in a world free from the stigma and discrimination experienced by anyone with an appearance-affecting condition, mark, or scar. And we're going to dive in a little bit deeper about what face equality means and how that relates to the word disability today. We're going to go just a little more context on that. Face Equality International is an awesome organization that we're working with, and they have posited that face equality is a human right. So International Face Equality Week 2022 will act as a public-facing moment to come together as an alliance to publicly call for recognition of facial difference as an equality and human rights issue. So that's why we're here today. So that's the background. I hope you all are interested in this topic. I know you are. That's why you're watching. And I would like to introduce everyone with me here on the panel now. So first of all, we have two CCA staffers. We have 𝐻𝐦𝐢𝐚𝐥 𝐄𝐪𝐮, our outreach director. She is the one responsible for getting all of these lives together, and our speakers bureau and our video content library. So thank you, 𝐻𝐻𝐦𝐢𝐚𝐥. And we have Kara Jackman. She's our marketing and communications coordinator, and she does all things Facebook and really helps support our adult programming, which is especially relevant to this topic today. So thank you, Kara, for being here. So now I will introduce our panel. First off, we have Tim Smith of the Many Faces of Mobius Syndrome. He is the president of that group. Thank you, Tim, so much for being here. Would you just give us a little quick sentence about yourself?
Thank you for introducing me. My name is Tim Smith. I'm the president and founder of the Many Faces of Mobius Syndrome. We started in 2008, and it has been a true pleasure to serve the community for over 14 years. I live in Virginia. I am an entrepreneur. I have two businesses. I have a pest control company, and I also drive for Uber. And when I'm not doing that, I work full-time for Walmart. So that's one big sentence. Thank you.
That is a big sentence, and that is many hats that you wear. So thank you for sharing that. Awesome. Next up, we have Iva Ballou, who is one of our speaker bureau's members, and she is a cleft confidence coach, and she is also the CEO of Real Sophisticated Joy. So Iva, will you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Myself, I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and palate, countless surgeries, and I grew up not feeling confident, not feeling like I had a place to fit in because of the treatment of my outward face. And through time, I was able to turn contempt into confidence. And I now have the pleasure of coaching and helping other kids and adults with craniofacials feel confident in themselves. And so I'm happy to be here and with this group.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. And finally on our panel is Philidia Swift, the CEO of Face Equality International, whose briefings helped me start this program and who have put this week together and have put all of the hard work behind this week. So I will turn it over to you, Philidia, to tell us a little bit more about your organization.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So hi. Yes, I am the CEO of Face Equality International. I have been advocating in the face equality space with organisations, including Changing Faces UK as well, ever since I was in a car accident in 2015 and I came out with significant facial scarring. And I came out into a world where the only representation of scarring that I saw was villains and vulnerable people. Mm-hmm. And I had some really negative experiences sharing my story in the media. And that lit a fire in my belly to want to reshape the narrative and to go out and campaign for face equality. And Face Equality Week has been a massive, massive part of that. So I'm really excited to talk about what's been going on and why we're calling for recognition of face equality as a human right. So thanks for hosting the conversation.
Our pleasure. We always love working with all of these different organizations, and CCA truly believes in collaboration. We say the rising tide lifts all the ships, and so I'm excited to be in the water with these great folks today. We are going to screen a video and then we're going to have a discussion. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but I do want to introduce this awesome video. It is called The ADA and the Perception of Disability, and it is by Rashira Dobson, also one of our Speakers Bureau, one of our very first Speakers Bureau members. Rashira is studying this as a student and an academic and a professional, and she's also a public speaker. But she came to us to do this video, which we recorded in October of last year, and we are just premiering today. So it's its very first living live moment. And we are happy to say that the Marin Community Foundation, in conjunction with Marlena Blavin and David Roche, who so many of us know and admire, made these videos possible. So again, this is the first one in the series, and we're super excited to kick it off. So we'll screen this video. It's about 16 minutes long, and we'll follow that up with some deep discussion. So I'm going to start that now.
The year before I was born, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed on July 26, 1990. Even though my physical birth came at the peak of this groundbreaking law that would protect individuals with disabilities across the nation, I was still pretty young. Matter of fact, I wasn't even born. And I was ignorant in how this protection of this law would later serve me in my adult years. In the US, adults with disabilities are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. And the ADA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one's or major life activities, a person who has a history or a record of such impairment, or a person who is perceived as having such an impairment. Under this act, individuals with facial deformities are also covered by this clause because it has, in which I like to refer to as the perception clause, which reads, a person who is perceived by others as having such an impairment. You know, in the facial difference community, perception is a big thing. Unlike mobile, physical, or even invisible disabilities, when people see a facial deformity or disfigurement, they tend to assume a plethora of things. And among that list of the things among assumptions also lies the perception of perceived incompetence. I'll use myself, for example. I was born with two rare conditions, Vader syndrome and golden heart syndrome. Both of these rare conditions consist of internal and external congenital birth defects and abnormalities. Now, Vader syndrome is a more invisible condition. However, golden heart syndrome consists of both invisible and visible differences. Golden heart syndrome is also considered a craniofacial condition, which is any condition or disease that impacts the head and or face. Now, when people see me, they may notice my crooked smile and my missing ear. Well, I'll say this. Depending on how I'm wearing my hair these days, the ear can be very easily overlooked. Nevertheless, only one trait of these two complex medical conditions make me disabled. And only one phrase in the ADA inducts me into the class of protected persons. And that is because I'm perceived by others as having a disability. People have always perceived that I was disabled, whether I disclose to them or not my technical disability. When others get a glimpse of me, they'll see my crooked mouth and my missing ear, and they'll assume, oh, she has a disability. There's something wrong with her. But my crooked face is not my disability. Me not having an ear which results in unilateral hearing loss and deafness, is my disability. But you would be surprised in how many people perceive me to be on this disability scale because of the differenceness of my face. And from this lifelong lived experience, I'm all too familiar with the misguided belief of having the perceived incompetence and how it so deeply impacts individuals who look different. I can stand as a witness and say that in my lifetime, I have had my fair share in issues and injustices related to me being perceived as being different. And despite me being a part of a protected class of citizens, socially and emotionally, I still felt very much exposed and vulnerable. I didn't know then, but there always seemed to be a hardship trailing behind me, a hardship that this law, the ADA, could not answer to. And that was the perception from my non-disabled peers, that perception and that judgment suggesting that because my face was different, because my smile was crooked, because I was missing an ear, that somehow translated to me missing intelligence and understanding. This perceived incompetence reinforced biases that can constantly question my abilities. This perceived incompetence turned a blind eye to staring and intrusive questioning. This perceived incompetence fueled ableism, in which we understand is a social discrimination against individuals with disabilities. Now, although we in the disability community understand that there is a wide spectrum in the disability field and impacts the lives of disabled individuals differently, we know disability is not a monolith and is no indication on one's ability to perform, to show up, or how they choose to live in their society. Nevertheless, although the ADA seems to understand what disability is or isn't, those in our society are still stuck on those negative misperceptions. You know, when we look at the word disability, it's highly stigmatized. I mean, even looking at the historical context surrounding disability, it really stems from a medical construct, which approaches disability as a deficit problem, something that needs to be fixed. And due to this long history of this negative stigma in this historical context, the perception of perceived incompetence is really embedded into our typical interaction and behavior towards disabled individuals. In many ways, individuals with disabilities face this belief system on a day-to-day basis. And most non-disabled people are completely oblivious to it until it's pointed out, kind of like what I'm doing here today. I could say in the core areas of my life and environments that I've had to navigate through, I have experienced the perceived incompetence belief system in many different ways. In the educational system, I experienced perceived incompetence when I was placed in a special education classroom well below my ability level and my skills. And this was all due to perceived incompetence of people seeing my facial difference and assuming my lack of intelligence. In the employment setting, I remember a time where I was on a job search and I went to this employment agency, and instead of doing an assessment of my skills, my abilities, my education level, I was placed in a warehouse packaging boxes. I wasn't asked about my career goals or aspirations, or even if I had a high school diploma or a college degree. I was simply placed in a position to fulfill a quota so that company could say that they hired someone with a disability. This is because of perceived incompetence. In my places of faith and worship, I wasn't introduced to my relationship with God as God being someone to have a spiritual experience with. Or more so, I was pressured to seek God to see how could he cure me of this disability and disease. And instead of having a human and spiritual experience, I was perceived as being incompetent of experiencing those things. In the social settings, being a Black woman with a disability, people don't think that we exist. And yet we are consistently excluded from conversations surrounding beauty. We are perceived as being incompetent and that our voices and our perspectives are not relevant in the standards of beauty and how society looks at women. I felt this burden throughout my whole life. The burden of having a disability speak for me whenever I enter a room. This burden became especially heavy as an adult, that I could just not explain the difficulty I was facing. I knew that there was this belief system working against me in times where I did not disclose or show any type of lack of understanding or incompetency. I found myself denied opportunities based upon the assumption of my ability to perform due to my physical appearance. I was not given the chance to provide clarity or an explanation, but a choice was made for me. And I found myself placed into a category that I never asked to be a part of. I came to recognize this belief system as an invisible barrier. And this invisible barrier is known as perceived incompetence. You know, perceived incompetence is not so much seen by the natural eye, but it is felt among those who stand as her prey. I spent a lot of time in my adult life trying to fight against this belief system, against this invisible barrier of perceived incompetence. At times, it forced me to go above and beyond, going way out of my way, trying to prove myself and my ability. I even had an internalized belief system that whispered to me saying, if I can appear to be as normal as possible, maybe they will accept me. You know, we talk about in our culture how we have internalized racism, which is basically the notion that one looks at their race as being inferior. Well, the same notion can apply to internalized ableism that tells us that disabilities are inferior as well. And I had to overcome that too. Having the appearance of a disability can sometimes put you at a disadvantage because many in our culture and in our environment hold on to belief systems unknowingly that equate disability to less than and or inferior. Hence, when non-disabled individuals meet a person with a disability, the question of incompetence is already framed. And this sets up an invisible barrier in which now the person with the disability is tasked with having to deconstruct. Many times the responsibility of addressing this invisible barrier is left up to the individuals with disabilities themselves. And it's not a shared concern among both disabled and non-disabled partners. Addressing misconceptions and false beliefs around disability should not solely rely on disabled individuals. It should also be the responsibility of our non-disabled peers, because those in the disability community desire to share the burden of being disabled instead of being siloed in a human experience. So what do? How will we remedy the belief of perceived incompetence? Well, I would say first, we have to expand our current definition of what disability is and push back against any notion that can limit or hinder a person's ability to thrive. Secondly, we have to intentionally create space for the protections of people with disabilities to grow and to not be so reliant on the definitions and the confines of the law, such as the ADA. You know, when I think back about my negative experiences related to being disabled, the ADA was not enough. The ADA could not protect me against implicit bias. The ADA could not protect me against teasing and bullying. The ADA could not protect me against awkward stares because of my facial difference. Although the law mentions the perception, the law cannot protect against prejudice. We have to change the way disability is perceived in our society. And that comes through education, communication, and the willingness to see disabled people exactly the way that they are, which in my opinion is beautiful and very well capable.
Awesome. I am excited to share that. There's so many. Every time I watch it, I've seen it a couple of times. I pick out something more. So that was Rashira's take on the ADA, which obviously is US based, but I'm going to turn it over to Phil to just kind of kick us off and tell us a little bit about how you see, just grand scheme, this conversation working into this week of action.
Yeah, so this is highly relevant because we're talking about rights. So this isn't just Face Equality Week, this is also the launch of our new focus as an alliance, which CCA is part of, to gather recognition for the facial difference community as an independent equality and human rights issue. And that's not to sever any ties with the ADA. That's not to say this is only a facial difference, it's siloed, it's entirely different. That is not what we're calling for. This is yes and rather than no, but like it's about recognizing the intersecting identities. Our aspirational vision for the best way to serve this community and to avoid some of those barriers, those social barriers that were explained so beautifully just then, is to validate and to protect the social experiences, the discrimination that comes from living in a society that prizes a certain appearance. And Rashira spoke about, some of the physical barriers that intersect, and it's really important to recognize all of the protections and accommodations that someone is entitled to under the ADA. But in addition to that, we believe that facial difference creates very unique barriers that I don't need to convince this community of. I don't need to plea to this particular space that discrimination is rife. We know that. What we do need to do is channel our energies into gathering that recognition in society, because it's just historically neglected. It's not been recognized. And we believe the best way to do that is say, well, okay, well, our aspirational vision is, okay, this is a human rights issue. There are people around the world being hidden away, being violated, being marginalized. And this is the best way to serve and protect that community. So one of the things that we're doing in the short term, which is really highly relevant to what Rashira was talking about, is we've produced a series of fact sheets to break down, to demystify the ADA, the UK Equality Act, the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, and also the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So those are all now on FEI's website, and it's a way to help the facial difference community to understand, to assert, to feel empowered, to know what rights and what the law does say currently about facial difference, because it's really complicated. There's a lot of really difficult legal jargon in there, and it's no wonder that it's really hard to use and that people aren't feeling empowered, or there's, this resignation. Oh, well, will I just find someone saying, you just need to toughen up, or you're not protected, or this doesn't fit within the definition of disability. So the best way to meet the community where they're at right now and build kind of solidarity and recognition for what's going on right now is to equip the community with the tools to understand and assert what rights exist right now, at the same time as saying, okay, well, ultimately, we want to create our own space to be seen and heard on our own terms. So that's the purpose of Face Equality Week.
Thank you so much for that high level vision. And I just to go almost the direct opposite, but I think it segues nicely, is this is our high level vision, but sometimes the best way to start those conversations are personal experiences shared to one another. So I'd like to maybe start with Iva. Is there a time that you want to reference or you've experienced where you have directly felt like you were perceived as disabled? And what was it like for you? How did you handle it? What was the outcome?
So I don't know. I definitely would say that it was clearly because of my face, but it's a moment that I think it was a defining moment of me and how I even show up today as a woman. But my mother, bless her, I love her, that she was very adamant that even though I had a cleft and craniofacial, that I had it and it didn't have me. So she wanted me to do the other things that kids did. And so one of those things is I was in the band and I played the flute, if you could call it that. But I was coming back from a 5th grade band recital, and one of my classmates was walking in front of me. And as I walked down the hallway, they had to be 2nd or 3rd grade on both sides. And as I began to walk down the hall, they started laughing and pointing and just anything that you could think to say. And I can remember inside I'm crushed, but there was a voice in me that was like, you can cry later, but you cannot cry right now. I just felt like I could not give them that. And so I did, and I made it through, and I didn't even tell my mom until maybe 2 days later, because I think it finally hit me, like, I was laughed at and ridiculed and made fun of something that I have no control of. And there was no one there to stop it, to protect it. I felt like I had no agency at that time. The only agency that I had was myself telling myself, do not cry in this moment. You have to get through this. And that is a moment that has, like, I can see it clear as I'm sitting right now. And it is why I now share my story, because number one, I didn't realize how much that affected me until I got older, but then also to help other kids to feel that confidence of walking down, because like Phil was saying and in the video, it's just a little rude of you to assume that because I look this way, I cannot do certain things, or that I am not deserving of just respect, just pure decency of respect of going about my day. That's not okay. That's not okay.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for sharing that story. And I can tell, like, it still is with you. It's palpable. You can feel it. So thank you for sharing that with us so openly. And I like what you said. It's not okay to assume that you can't do something. And I think similarly, it's not okay to assume that we don't want certain things. I feel like that's one of those ones that has often been that undercurrent. Well, you don't want to wear makeup.
Mad. They don't even ask.
Yeah.
It's like, no, the same thing you want, I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Tim, do you have a time you'd like to add in and share? Is there one that sticks out for you?
There are many instances in my childhood where I was teased for absolutely no reason. Back in the 60s and 70s, people saw you and you weren't normal. They just laughed their head off. But I want to actually go back to something that was said in a video, and that was about the perception clause, being that people think that people with a disability are incompetent. And that is absolutely spot on. And that happens, I believe, because that's the way people with disabilities or with facial disfigurements have been treated in history, in the movies, the literature, and even some of the textbooks. And it not only affects the way that people see us, it affects the way that we feel about ourselves. Because I think that one of the reasons why I wear so many hats, because in the back of my mind, I don't think that I'm worthy. So I have to keep going forward, and I have to keep fighting. And that's something that I think that we all need to be aware of. And we change people's perspective when we change the way history perceives us. And that's not for this generation, but for the next generation. We get on TV, we have positive stories. We have no more fairy tale books written about the evil Grinch, positive stories about people with disabilities. And I think that will change a lot of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, some of this work we're doing will be, carry forward into the next generation. And so it's important for us to do it now. And like you said, doing that work of realizing some of the coping mechanisms we've developed are in efforts to overcome things that happened to us probably before we were even realizing how impactful those moments were. So yeah, thank you for sharing too, Tim. I think another question I have, and I'll jump over to Phil, is Rashira uses these words that are so piercing, like exposed and vulnerable, and a hardship that followed her. And just to you, I know yours is an acquired facial difference. How did those words resonate with you?
Yeah, I can speak to the feeling of the first time I went out after my accident, and that very new and unique feeling of everybody's looking at me. Everybody's making assumptions. Everyone's thinking things in their heads. The first kind of year or so after my accident, I'd meet new people and I would be so stifled in conversation, wondering, what are they thinking? Do I address this? I couldn't speak because I was so worried about what they were thinking. So there is that feeling of being exposed, going out in public, getting on the tube every day when I was working in London. And it's the intrusive nature of, okay, there is an entitlement that exists within society when it comes to facial difference and disability. And there seems to be just a free for all. People think, oh, well, it's, I can go up and ask what happened to them. Why do you look like that? What happened? What's wrong with you? And that is an experience that I believe, brings great parallels and kind of that mutual understanding with people that identify both as having a facial difference and a disability, is that kind of intrusiveness from society.
That's a very good point. Yes, I think I wrote down something, or Shara said that disabilities automatically assume something is wrong. It does. It's just a state of being that has to be negative, and how that is true. Society is like, what's wrong? And I always hate that word or hate that phrase. Anybody else? Tim, Iva, jump in.
I have to say, Phil, that is it, because even very early on, you said about educating the non-affected. That is the number one thing that we have to do, because why, as an adult, are you coming to a child and asking what's wrong or what happened? And so it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to internalize that feeling of, well, there is something wrong with me. And you have, because I'm not going to speak. I don't want to speak because I was just afraid that anything else that I said, you're already just looking at my cleft. That's all you see. And then also, to go back to what Tim said, it even goes back to the doctors and changing what they say, because having doctors that will say, oh, because of this, they'll never live a normal life. They'll never be able to do certain things, and they told my parents the same. And thankfully they were like, okay, thank you for your opinion. We're going to think other things. But it starts from the doctors. You're supposed to be in my care, like hold, like as my care doctor, and this is what you're saying about me. You've already put that label on me.
Totally, totally.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Please.
I think, I don't look at it like I have a disability. The way I view it is I have a different ability. I can, and what my different ability is I can view things different than other people, because I know how it is to walk in this world with a condition that most people don't have. I know how I can get through this world and be successful. But I also understand, because I'm old, I'm 59 years old, I understand how people think. And that allows me to kind of mold what happens in my life and what I'm able to do towards people. And nobody has a different disability. We all have different abilities. And instead of looking at something and saying, what's wrong with you? Let's look at people and say, what's right at you? Because we are all better at some things than others. And let's push the positive and get rid of the negative.
Yes, that reminds me of another thing I wrote down from Rashira's video, how disability is described as a deficit problem. We need to move away from disability equaling deficit. And Phil, how do we, what are some of these on the ground things? This is a big question, so apologies. But what are best practices that you can share with us to move away from that mentality?
The idea of deficit and kind of negative connotations, is that what you're asking?
Yes, yeah.
So I guess in addition to the rights focus, the heavy stuff, the advocacy that is really, tricky, we want the positive stories, we want the respectful stories, the normalization. Like if we reach a point where it's normal to see someone with a facial difference on our screen, just incidentally, where the focus of the story is not about their highly medical experience or them, being an object of pity, or, where they're just incidentally there, that is when we no longer need to exist as an organization. And if we can promote that sort of representation, those sorts of stories, whether it's in film, TV, on social media, normalize difference and celebrate difference, and celebrate it in a way where it's not objectifying the individual, where it's just, getting to a place where we're used to seeing difference in all of its kind of diversity, and debunking and demystifying it as well. Like there's a huge amount of stigma that comes from an awkwardness, a fear of saying the wrong thing. What language do I use? What's kind of politically correct? And there's a huge amount of shame that surrounds that. And I think that feeds into the internalized ableism that Rashira was talking about, is the fact that even we're not equipped with the right language sometimes to talk about this stuff. We don't have like an equivalent of ableism in the facial difference kind of space. Facism doesn't really work. And yet we need to have these conversations in a shame-free way where people don't fear saying the wrong thing. And I think we get very caught up on, you have to use the right term, you have to use the right kind of language, when actually the most important thing is that you're talking about it at all, and you're talking about it at home with your family, you're talking about it with your friends. I speak about this stuff. I test messages with my friends all the time. I'm like, how do you perceive someone with a facial difference? Do you see this as the same as disability? Like I try and test this stuff every place I possibly can, because that is how we destigmatize and challenge people to really scrutinize some of the historical stereotypes that we've seen, that we still see on our screens, when we see Disney films and Bond films and villains with facial differences and just old, lazy kind of narratives still dragged out and repurposed. Things like The Greatest Showman, for example, you know, glorified as this amazing thing, but it's basically a freak show, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and all of these things that are just not helpful. So challenging that and having these conversations and, you know, empowering the facial difference community and giving the tools to have these conversations, like your Speakers Bureau, you know, putting those tools out there to present facial difference in all of its kind of multifaceted, kind of celebratory, and, you know, not shying away from how difficult it can be, but normalizing having these conversations in a shame-free way is a great way to try and make change.
I 100% agree. And I appreciate you bringing that up so much, because all of this this video series and everything, something that we've been working on, especially with David, is to flip the script. The Speakers Bureau started to talk about, you know, this is our experience, and if we get this experience out there, people will maybe understand and change their behavior. But now we want to represent our speakers, and Khadijah, forgive me for like giving a little teaser to the world. Our speakers, we want them to speak on topics other than their facial difference. So by just existing with the facial difference, that is doing the normalizing and the destigmatizing, because you're coming to speak on a topic completely unrelated to the facial difference. And it shows in that way, it quickly breaks that barrier of perceived incompetence when you get up there and you start presenting on, you know, I don't know, human resources or chemistry or whatever your topic may be. There, you know, your audience is instantly like, wait, I thought this was going to be, you know, something different. And now I see that this person is a whole complete person. And this is just incidentally there. So I like what you said, you know, Phil, when we don't have to make the conversation about the medical journey or the past or the the bullying and the intolerance, that has when we have moved beyond where we are now. But we are still there a little bit. So we're still doing the work. Let's see, who wants to, does anyone else have some thoughts on fighting internalized ableism, how you've overcome that?
I'll touch to that, but also feel that part of that, I think also how you're saying, like, you don't have the right language, that's understandable. My thing is always your intent. That you can ask me all of the questions that you want if I can feel your intent. I think that's another thing. It is simply, if you're just, you don't know, you never ever in your life met someone, and you just simply, I just want to know so I can understand. Ask your questions. Ask your questions. It's a whole other thing when you are just snarling at me as if I did something wrong. Technically, in this moment right now, the only person who was wrong is you. But I did want to say that. I think one of the things that for me and Rashida talked about, because again, being an African-American woman with a cleft, growing up, that was hard because no one looked like me. And really just coming to a point of, as talk about different topics, of finding joy. I had to know who I was and what confidence meant for me and what that looked like. And okay, oh, I feel confident when I do that. Let me do more of that. Oh, I like that. And just finding little things. And when I would go out and do them, as Erica, you were talking about, it would be like a meld of, oh, she does this, this, and this. And my cleft was never mentioned. And it was like, oh, yeah, you know, that's part of me too. But I show up as this. And I think that's a really good thing. And having others do that, the more that we can do that in the community, it's like, oh, it's to normalize it. We are the same. We are all the same, as Tim saying. We are all the same. We all have something that makes us different. So let's just celebrate our commonalities and the things that we do well and the things that bring us joy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tim, do you have anything to add in on this point?
I think we all feel exposed. And the best way to flip that, in my opinion, is by positive exposure, like we've all been talking about. You do mention the fact that you have a facial disfigurement, and people see that and they know it. But you talk like the speaker girl. You talk about all the other things that you can do, what you're part of, and that's what sticks in people's minds. I could walk into the store, one day, and some little kid will see me and go, "Mommy, Daddy, what's wrong with his face?" And that's gonna suck for me. But if I flip that and I turn it into positive exposure for myself and for others, maybe that kid will look at me one day and say, "Hey, wow, I want to be like him. I want to do some of the things he can." And they'll look beyond my facial limitations. So I think the best way to not feel exposed is to if you can, to put yourself out there, positive exposure.
Yeah, I love that. I love the thought of a little kid pointing to any of us and saying, "I want to be like that." That is absolutely what it should be, and it shouldn't be that big of an ask, and it's not that big of an ask. That is happening. So absolutely. Well, I mean, we are drawing kind of close on time, so I do want to close with the pledge that Face Equality International has created, this pledge, and I will read it, and then I'll get kind of a round robin commentary on it and last thoughts and everything else you want to put out there. This has been such a wonderful discussion. I could go on and on. So thank you for giving your time, all three of you. I really appreciate that. And for our watchers and listeners out there, thank you for taking the time to do that. So I will read this pledge and then I'll comment. The pledge is, I pledge to make face equality a reality. Disfigurement is a globally neglected human rights issue. It's also an issue that many people don't feel equipped to talk about, which makes growth towards inclusion difficult. Now is the time to come together and change society to better protect people with facial differences from harm and from discrimination. Let's build a global movement that finally puts facial difference at the forefront of public consciousness, a movement that enables people to live a life free from prejudice and commands respect for facial difference. Let's make face equality a reality. So that is a beautiful pledge. Thank you, FEI, for putting that out there for us. And I guess my comment is for anyone out there watching this without a facial difference, our allies in the community, what we've talked about today takes a lot of emotional labor. When we want to put a positive spin on things and when we want to educate, that is a lot of background work that people with facial differences and their parents and their siblings are doing over a lifetime. So if you out there can show your intent, can ask, forgive me if I use the wrong language, if you can do some of that emotional labor yourselves now by watching this video, you're doing it, that will help move this movement forward. So that is my thought. Tim, what about you? What's your thought on the pledge?
I love the pledge. I actually did a video, and if y'all saw it where I took the pledge. For the last 14 years, I've been standing up and trying to erase the prejudice that people see from having a facial difference and having a rare disease or a rare syndrome, both. And I will continue to do that. It's like it said, it's not something that we just do 1 or 2 times a month or a year. It's something that we have to do all the time. And it's something that we have some very severe emotional scars from, but it's something that we rise above, something that we push forward and we do better. And I hope that people see that. And I really hope that people can understand that no matter what we look like or what we talk like or whatever, that we're just like everybody else. And all we want is for you to give us a chance. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Iva, what about you?
I'm going to echo Tim. The part that stood out the most for me was the time is now for us to come together. This is going to be a 2-part relationship. Us as the affected and those that non-affected coming together, asking those questions, and us also being vulnerable and having the, with educating. but if we do it together, we can get there. And I think it's a beautiful thing once we do, and then we can just have that shared experience of, this is who you are, this is who I am, and let's move forward. And I do look forward to the day where James Bond, you hear it first, has a cleft or a scar, and it's not even mentioned, it's just a part of him, or that is a dream that I know is going to come into reality. So I look forward to that day.
Absolutely. We need a hot, sexy character.
Something. I know Hollywood is going to hear it. We're going to make that noise collectively together, and we're going to see it. Just wait.
If Hollywood is looking for a leading man to play a love role, I'm available.
That's right, Tim. Put it out there.
I'm on Facebook.
Put it out there, Tim. I believe in that.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Lydia, what are your thoughts? You know this pledge so well.
I do. Yeah, no, I would just say it's a great tool to, like we've said, it's a tool for someone who has personal experience, but also for someone who doesn't, to show solidarity. It's a great tool if you want to do something to support the cause that is anonymous, that is relatively easy. One of the other things that we're asking people to do is take a selfie, but realizing that's very visible. And doing that can be really tricky. So this is a great way to do something that supports the cause, that builds momentum, that helps us to validate and put pressure on to say, well, look, this many people are saying that this is an issue. And I think what we've spoken about, again, is this is a neglected area, and we need to put pressure on and recognize that this is affecting millions of people worldwide. So the pledge is a great way to actually capture that. So I would encourage people to use it, to share it, or keep it going. And just to say that there are plenty of other ways to get involved on our website. And again, if you want to find some tools that will equip you to talk about this stuff, whether it's in your school, in your workplace, we've got the CCA resources on our site. There's stuff from the Many Faces of Moebius syndrome on there. There's so much to delve into. It can be overwhelming, but it is really about equipping everybody with the tools to make this a reality. So yeah.
Absolutely. And where is that website? Where can we find all of those resources?
So just head to faceequalityinternational.org. We've got a resources page. On there right now, we've got all of the legal fact sheets that we've prepared to help people understand their rights. It's a great community to say, come along, tell us how to make a difference. We can all have the power to make a difference. It's a joy to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thank you. And Tim, where can Hollywood contact you? What is the website they need to look up? And other folks.
www.manyfacesofmoebius.org, or for short, www.mfoms.org, and that's how you can find me, Hollywood, and we'll start talking salary. But I want to take a second to thank Hilda for all the work she's done over the last couple of years in putting this together. It's just amazing because she puts a lot of thought and effort into it. And the one thing, we've had quite a few conversations, and the one thing I really like about working with Face Equality International is, when talking to them, I don't have to try to pretend to be somebody I'm not. I don't have to try to hold things back. I can be who I am, and I can be natural, and that is awesome. And they're a great group to work with. And Erica and I go back quite a few years. Erica, thank you once again for hosting this.
Oh, my pleasure.
And to our guests, it was great meeting you.
Yes. And I've
we're connected now. We're connected now, Tim. And I'm not easy to get rid of. So But you can also find me at www.realsophisticatedjoy.com, as well as on Instagram and TikTok. I do not dance, but I do give out great tips. But it has been a joy to be here today. And Billy, you already know, I'm always watching what she's doing, and I'm just like so proud, so proud. And thank you for what you're doing for the community. And thank you, everyone.
Yes, absolutely. This has just been a great discussion. I hope to have more. And on the whole, we've touched on it and joked about it, but tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central on YouTube, we are launching Dr. Jasmine Gray's talk in this series, and hers is about a challenge to Hollywood casting directors and about the media and how to tell your story, managing Hollywood's expectations and avoiding exploitation. So definitely check that out on YouTube, CCA's YouTube page. So we've got a lot going on. I know all of the organizations do. So just connect, check out the Facebook comments, and we will post this later on YouTube with links to all of our guests and follow-up events that are happening. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much for the time you put into this. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.